We can't change the past or bring them back, but we can still choose kindness. These emotional words came from Sarah Grace Patrick as she tearfully honored the lives of her mother, 41-year-old Kristen Brock, and her stepfather, 45-year-old James Brock, during their funeral service. The couple had been brutally murdered in the early morning of February 20th, 2025. No one could have imagined that the very person grieving before the mourners was actually the one who pulled the trigger.
I'm really happy I get to do this, but just bear with me because I stutter a lot. I just wanted to say goodbye to my mom and Jamie since we never got the chance to. I was so used to you guys always being here to the point that I never once thought to imagine y'all not being here. I didn't have a single clue how much I needed y'all until now.
On social media, she continued to publicly grieve the loss of her mother and stepfather, often sharing how deeply she missed her mom and how difficult life had become since their deaths. For more than 4 months, the killings of Kristen and James Brock remained a mystery. No one ever suspected that the 17-year-old girl who lived under the same roof could be involved. But when the authorities finally uncovered new evidence, the truth stunned everyone. Authorities have officially confirmed an arrest in the case. 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick, daughter of Kristen Brock, has been apprehended and now faces 2 murder charges along with 2 counts of aggravated assault. But the mystery deepens. What drove her to commit such a horrific act? What could compel someone to take the lives of their own mother and stepfather? And how could she call the police after killing her mom, only to carry on as if nothing had occurred? We're continuing to cooperate closely with her, and our investigators have been in active communication. Yes, it's true. She was the one who placed the 911 call. When did suspicion start to fall on her? As with most investigations, everyone is considered a potential suspect in the early stages. I mentioned that to many of you on the day we arrived at the scene. But as the case progressed and the investigation unfolded, we gathered a significant amount of evidence. As I noted in my earlier statement, it was this overwhelming amount of information, along with support from our law enforcement partners, that ultimately led us to focus on her. Sarah Grace Patrick. If true crime stories like this captivate you, hit the subscribe button and enable notifications. Because we don't just recount events. We are the currents of history, ensuring that every story worth remembering is brought back to light. Subscribe today. Tyus Carlton Road lay still on a chilly February morning, a narrow 2-lane path that cuts through rural fields and aged southern forest. Life out here moves at a gentle pace. Neighbors greet each other by name. Sunday church is a tradition. True danger almost never shows up. But on February 20th, 2025, something unfolded that Carroll County had never experienced. That morning's sunrise didn't just light up the Georgia sky. It uncovered a much darker truth. Inside a humble residence at 790 Tyus Road, a mother and her husband were found shot to death in their bed. There were no broken windows, no stolen items, no signs of intrusion, only silence and tragedy. The atmosphere was eerie, intentional, and cold. The 911 call didn't come from the victims, but from their 17-year-old daughter, Sarah Grace Patrick. Officials say she phoned emergency services after her 6-year-old sister stumbled upon the horrifying scene, trying to rouse their parents, only to discover they were lifeless. But how does a child that young make sense of such horror? And how does a teenage sibling react to something so shocking? At first glance, it seemed like a heartbreaking case of domestic violence, or maybe a senseless act of crime. But the truth was far more unsettling. This was a calculated act, deeper and more haunting than anyone expected. Inside the couple's bedroom, investigators discovered the lifeless bodies of 41-year-old Kristen Brock and her 45-year-old husband, James. Both had been fatally shot as they lay in bed, a fact that authorities confirmed multiple times. The Brocks were active and beloved members of Catalyst Church in Carrollton. Kristen was remembered as warm and vibrant, while James was cherished for his quick wit and humor. Churchgoers recalled how the couple would always attend Sunday services side by side, never missing a week, always sitting in the same row. Now they're gone, murdered in the safety of their home, and no one, not even their closest companions, saw it coming. No windows were shattered, and no doors appeared forced open. The only anomaly was a slightly open door, nothing more. There were no indications of a struggle. Most strikingly, nothing seemed to be taken. If theft wasn't the motive, then what exactly happened? Why would someone break into a house during the dead of night, walk directly to the main bedroom, shoot two individuals, and leave without disturbing anything else? Was it a contract killing, a grudge-fueled act? Or could the murderer have already been inside, hiding in plain sight? At first glance, the Brocks appeared to be a typical blended American family. Kristen and James had been married for several years and were peacefully raising their two daughters, 17-year-old Sarah Grace and her much younger sibling, in a quiet rural setting. But as the investigation unfolded in the months after the tragic deaths, detectives began to pick up on something peculiar. Sarah Grace had placed herself squarely in the public eye during the grieving process. She gave a heartfelt speech at her mother's funeral. She frequently posted touching messages online. Her mourning was loud, emotional, and full of affection. But then a question arose. Why did every trail of evidence keep circling back to her? This case never went cold, not even for a moment. From the very beginning, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office worked tirelessly, day and night. Federal agencies like the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, were involved almost immediately. A joint task force meticulously analyzed both digital and physical evidence, interviewed numerous individuals, and slowly assembled a narrative, one that, while not publicly shared, was convincing enough for the prosecutors. Sheriff spokesperson Ashley Halsey emphasized, "We wanted to be completely certain. This is someone's daughter, someone's sister. Charging a 17-year-old is not something we took lightly." Yet, despite their progress, authorities still held off on pressing charges for several months. Then, in the early days of July, a major development occurred. Sarah Grace Patrick was informed that an arrest warrant had been issued in her name. Rather than fleeing or attempting to hide, she calmly arrived at the Carroll County Jail with her father by her side and voluntarily surrendered. No high-speed pursuits, no handcuffs in public, just a teenage girl accused of killing her own mother and stepfather, walking through the front doors of a sheriff's department. Think about that. A young woman who had eulogized her mother, poured out grief online, and wept openly among loved ones, was now charged with pulling the trigger. What transpired in the 5 months between the double homicide and her arrest? What changed behind the scenes? Sarah was formally charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 of aggravated assault. She would be prosecuted as an adult. Despite being only 17 years old, her bail was either refused or still under consideration at the time of her arrest. The justice system was treating her case with utmost seriousness. In a public statement, Sheriff Halsey emphasized, "We dedicated 5 months to ensuring this was done properly, and we fully trust the evidence that brought us to this point. Yet, many in the public, and possibly even within the law enforcement community, were left with lingering doubts. The most unsettling aspect of the entire case isn't necessarily the killings, but the absence of a clear motive. Up until now, authorities haven't revealed any explanation. There's been no confession, no mention of abuse, no signs of financial gain, and no confirmed personal conflict, just silence where answers should be. What could have led this teenager to supposedly carry out such a horrific act? Was there a hidden issue within the family that went unnoticed? Could it have stemmed from mental health struggles, long-standing emotional stress, or an entirely different cause? While Sarah remains the main person accused, authorities have stated they are not ruling out the possibility of other individuals being involved. Is it possible she didn't act alone? Amid the tragedy, many consider the most heartbreaking figure to be the 6-year-old girl who discovered the lifeless bodies of her parents. She didn't just lose her mother and stepfather that day, she also lost her older sister to the justice system. It's unclear what she witnessed or how much her young mind can comprehend. But what's certain is that this investigation, now involving top-level authorities, has stripped her of her innocence, her family, and the church community at Catalyst Church, where the Brocks were cherished members. What began as mourning soon turned into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. When the news of Sarah's arrest spread, friends and members of the church declined to speak publicly. The once supportive and outspoken community suddenly fell quiet. The entire tragedy had evolved into something far more complicated, emotionally devastating, and difficult to grasp. A family once seen as a symbol of unity and faith was now broken by an unimaginable act of betrayal. Sarah Grace Patrick is currently detained, and the legal procedures have begun. Yet, many questions remain unanswered. What could drive a young girl to allegedly take the lives of her own caregivers? How can someone publicly grieve while concealing such a dark secret? Were there warning signs overlooked in the days leading up to the tragedy? Most importantly, is there a deeper truth still waiting to be revealed? Has the full story yet to emerge? In Carroll County, Georgia, 2 people have lost their lives. A family lies shattered, and a child bears deep trauma. The accused is someone nobody expected. Beneath the sorrow, the funerals, and the prayers, a hidden truth continues to surface. Was this outburst fueled by sudden anger, a long-held resentment, or a carefully planned act of something far more malevolent? The answers, once revealed, will determine how this small town in Georgia will forever remember Sarah Grace Patrick's name. What caught investigators' attention right away was the eerie quietness of the scene. Sometimes silence can be the loudest signal. Officers from the Carroll County Sheriff's Office described their first walkthrough as deeply unsettling. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood trails, and no evidence of theft. One deputy told a local journalist, "It looked as if someone had simply gone to sleep and never woke up." The front door was either unlocked or left slightly ajar, but everything else appeared untouched. No electronics were missing, no signs of a quick escape, and no proof of any outsider's involvement. This left law enforcement facing a troubling question. Was the perpetrator already inside the house? If that was the case, within 48 hours, this investigation had escalated beyond a typical rural homicide. It became evident that the case demanded more expert attention and advanced resources. The FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, were called in to assist the task force. Forensic specialists from both agencies were deployed not only to examine the house itself, but also to analyze the surrounding digital environment: phones, emails, social media accounts, smart devices, and any electronic traces that could help piece together the events. Why did this case draw such intense attention? Because nothing about it added up. And when facts don't align, you don't assume, you investigate. A suspect can rehearse what they say. They can carefully manage what they post online. But their clicks, their searches, those speak volumes. According to sources close to the case, law enforcement secured digital warrants for several devices tied to family members, including phones, laptops, tablets, cloud accounts, social media profiles, call logs, and text messages. What was discovered remains unknown. Officials have remained. Authorities have intentionally remained silent regarding the specifics of the evidence. However, what has been made clear is that it brought them to a single, chilling conclusion. Sarah Grace Patrick wasn't merely a heartbroken daughter. She was officially under suspicion. Over a span of 5 months, investigators interviewed dozens of individuals, including extended relatives, church members, classmates, school counselors, and neighbors. Sarah Grace was also questioned. Every conversation was examined for gaps, inconsistencies, or conflicting accounts. Why did Sarah appear so composed while speaking at the funeral? Why was her grief so outwardly expressed, yet somehow didn't feel genuine? What was the relationship like between her and her mother in the days before the murders? One source told People magazine that the family dynamic had visible strain. Another mentioned that Sarah had been splitting her time between different homes and wasn't always staying at the Brocks. So, was there an underlying tension the public hadn't seen? And if so, why did no one catch it? Law enforcement stated that the residents had some form of security system in place. It's uncertain whether this involved smart surveillance cameras or just a basic alarm setup, but investigators managed to collect footage and data from surrounding sources. They examined nearby Ring doorbells, traffic cameras, and neighboring surveillance systems to track any activity near the property. Investigators searched for suspicious movement during the night. Yet again, nothing pointed to an external intrusion. No unfamiliar cars, no unidentified visitors, just 2 daughters, a teenager and her younger sister, inside the home where their parents were found dead. In complex cases like this, investigators begin by assembling a detailed, minute-by-minute timeline. Key questions arise. When were the victims last seen or heard from? What were they doing in the hours before their deaths? Who was present? When did Sarah go to sleep? When did she dial 911? When exactly were the shots fired? The autopsy would later help pinpoint the time of death more accurately, crucial for determining who had both motive and opportunity. Although sheriff's officials refused to disclose full details, they confirmed the volume of both digital and physical evidence was significant. So what might that include? While the exact evidence list remains unknown, in similar cases involving teenagers and digital forensics, authorities often examine internet searches. Did Sarah research how to hide a crime, how firearms work, or send any suspicious messages? Were there signs of planning, threats, or even confessions? What about GPS data? Why did it take 5 months? This question has been on everyone's mind since Sarah Grace was arrested in July. If authorities suspected her so early, why the delay? According to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, the answer lies in the complexity of the evidence. They were cautious not to act too soon. They didn't want to make an arrest solely on suspicion. Instead, they aimed to build a solid prosecutable case, one that would hold up in court beyond doubt. This is someone's child, someone's sister. We do not take this matter lightly, Sheriff Terry Langley stated during a July press briefing. We acted only when we were completely sure. On July 8, 2025, Sarah Grace Patrick voluntarily surrendered at the Carroll County Jail, accompanied by her father. She had been informed beforehand about the arrest warrant. There was no standoff, no attempt to flee, and no public denial. Was this an expression of remorse or a strategic move to control the narrative? Only Sarah and the courts may know the answer. There is still more information expected. According to the latest reports from the Sheriff's Office, authorities have not dismissed the chance of more arrests. The investigation remains active, with other potential suspects possibly involved, and the evidence continues to be examined. This raises a critical question. Did Sarah act alone, or was there another individual involved? A friend, a partner, or someone influencing her? Answers might take weeks, months, or may never come. What is clear, however, is that the violence was deliberate and planned. The victims were shot in their sleep. The accused was a daughter who was trusted. Often, it's not outsiders who tear families apart. Sometimes, it's the very person you invite to share your meals. The one who prays alongside you before dinner. The family setup. Let's rewind. Kristen Brock, 41, was a mother to 2 daughters. Sarah Grace Patrick, her oldest, came from a previous relationship. The youngest daughter, only 6 years old, was with her husband, James Brock, 45. James had taken on the stepfather role several years earlier. A contractor by profession, locals described him as quirky, hardworking, and friendly. Kristen was recognized for her strong faith. A familiar face at Catalyst Church, she was considered warm, passionate, and, as a friend put it, someone who gave hugs freely. On Sundays, they represented an ideal Southern family, smiling, serving, and praying. But what was really going on behind those Sunday smiles at home? Sarah Grace Patrick, the eldest child, was only 17 at the time of the killings. Public information portrays her home life as unstable. She didn't consistently live with her mother or stay in a single location. Several news outlets reported that she spent time residing with relatives, frequently moving between houses and sometimes staying with extended family members. Was this arrangement voluntary or forced by circumstances? A family acquaintance shared that Sarah mostly fended for herself. Though brief, this statement sparked deeper questions. Had she grown distant from her mother? Was there conflict with James? Or were these typical adolescent struggles? Were cracks forming behind the family's perfect image? Let's focus on what is publicly verified. Sarah was not always living full-time with Kristen and James. So, what might have triggered such a profound break? The disparity was clear. Love shown publicly, but distance felt privately. At Kristen Brock's funeral, Sarah Grace gave a speech. Many who attended remember her words as heartfelt, raw, and full of sorrow. On social media, Sarah shared touching tributes, celebrating her mother's life and grieving the loss. For some, it was deeply moving. For others, it sparked suspicion. She appeared too composed, almost rehearsed. One anonymous attendee told reporters it seemed as if she was trying to convince everyone of something. Was her grief genuine, or was it a facade? Had she truly lost her mother, or was she concealing a secret all along? Relationships with step-parents are often complicated. Being a step-parent is a challenging role. Even in caring families, the lines can be unclear. Loyalty may feel split. Affection might seem conditional. Was James Brock strict or disciplinarian? Or did Sarah view him as an outsider? While we don't have his perspective, the grim fact is that he was killed in the same violent event as Sarah's mother, in the same bed. The attack wasn't directed at just one parent. It targeted both. This detail sends a chilling message to investigators. Whoever committed this wasn't merely fueled by anger. They intended to erase an entire family. Sarah's youngest sister, only 6 years old, was the one who found their bodies, called to them, and tried to rouse them. She lost both of her parents. Then a few weeks later, she also lost her older sister. Sheriff Terry Langley described her as the most innocent victim in this case, a child now engulfed in grief, trauma, and media attention, likely unaware of the entire truth. Who will care for her now? What beliefs will shape her as she grows? And what part did Sarah once have in her life? Protector, rival, or stranger? The extended family, including Sarah's biological father, has largely stayed silent. There have been no public comments or family interviews, only a quiet moment when her father accompanied her to jail on July 8th. Was this a last act of support or a silent acceptance of an unavoidable reality? We don't know, and perhaps we never will. Ultimately, this was not a crime committed in the dead of night. It was the breakdown of a household, trust, and family bonds. No one shouted, no one fled, no one called for help until it was far too late. She cried openly at the funeral. She posted heartfelt tributes on social media. She was the one who called 911. She tried to comfort her little sister. And for 5 long months, no one could see what was concealed beneath Sarah Grace Patrick's sorrow. Then, when the charges were announced on July 8th, 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault, the world asked a single question: why? Why would a 17-year-old girl with no criminal history, no signs of abuse, and no record of violence turn against the very people who raised her? And why at this moment? This is the part of the story that offers no simple explanations, because it's where things become most unsettling. There's been no official motive shared. So let's look at what is known. Up to now, law enforcement hasn't released any formal explanation for why Sarah may have done this. The Carroll County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation have all declined to disclose their reasoning. Why the silence? Sheriff Terry Langley stated, "We are examining every possible aspect of the case. We haven't dismissed the idea that others may be involved. Our main focus is to preserve the evidence and ensure proper legal procedure." In other words, they're holding back. And while their silence may be deliberate, it only fuels the public's desperate need for answers. Where do we draw the line between theories and facts? Speculation comes easily, but this situation isn't fiction. It's a real and tragic case. 2 lives have been lost. 1 teenager is accused, another child is left emotionally scarred. That's why we stick to the facts, confirmed, documented facts, and analyze them with clarity and honesty. So, what do we actually know that might point to a motive? Sarah Grace moved between different households and didn't always live with her mother. No allegations of abuse were ever reported. There were no prior run-ins with the police or signs of criminal behavior. The house showed no signs of break-in or theft. Both victims were shot while asleep. Authorities gathered a vast amount of physical and digital evidence. Investigators are convinced the attack was deliberate and directed. These are the pieces we have. Digital forensics played a critical role in Sarah's arrest. Authorities have openly acknowledged gathering an enormous volume of digital data. Everything from browsing history and text conversations to social media behavior, cloud storage, call records, and GPS metadata. While the exact contents remain sealed, the fact that the case took 5 months to assemble indicates it wasn't straightforward. The evidence had to be pieced together carefully and validated. Still, it was strong enough to lead to a murder charge. Control, anger, and escape, in other cases involving teens who kill family members, motives often fall into categories. Control. The child feels manipulated or restricted. Anger, conflict builds to violence. Escape. The teen wants out at any cost. External influence. A third party encourages the act. Is it possible Sarah felt trapped? Friends and peers have not publicly commented, but reports suggest she may have felt isolated, independent, even removed from the household. Was she battling mental health issues? Was she secretly angry about her living arrangements? Was she trying to start over, to erase the past and rebuild something new? We can't say for sure, but it's the direction many are quietly exploring. Maybe what unsettles people most is the absence of red flags. This wasn't a troubled household under scrutiny. There were no police interventions, no school warnings, no disturbing writings, or threats posted online. By every outward measure, Sarah Grace Patrick appeared ordinary, someone who laughed in pictures, spent time with friends, and bowed her head in prayer on Sundays. But somewhere beneath that surface, something shifted. Something broke. And now, 2 lives are gone. Sheriff Terry Langley mentioned that certain aspects of the case, including the motive, might only be revealed during the trial. This means the public may not learn the reasoning behind the crime until the court proceedings begin, which could take months. When that day comes, prosecutors will need to present a case that proves intent, planning, and perhaps most critically, a motive. Even if that motive is unclear, emotional, or irrational, jurors will want to grasp what caused Sarah to break. Until then, all we have are theories. And in a case like this, theories bring little peace. For the victims, the motive doesn't change the outcome. Kristen and James are still dead. Their youngest daughter remains without parents. Sarah is in jail. But for the rest of us, for the sake of understanding and justice, motive is essential. We seek to know why. Because if a seemingly average teenager can commit something so horrific, what warning signs did we miss? What should we be watching for in our schools, our homes, our communities? In a world addicted to answers, motive becomes our only anchor. But this won't just be another courtroom formality. It's far more than paperwork or a legal case number. This is the story of a family torn apart and a town left reeling in its aftermath. So, where do we go from here? What does accountability mean when the person on trial is still a teenager? The arrest came without drama, but with finality. On the morning of July 8, 2025, Sarah Grace Patrick arrived at the Carroll County Jail beside her biological father. There were no cuffs at school, no public spectacle, only a quiet handover. By that point, investigators had compiled 5 months of evidence, combining digital footprints, physical proof, and extensive interviews. The charges came quickly and carried weight: 2 counts of malice murder, 2 of aggravated assault. Sarah would be prosecuted as an adult, a minor at the center of a double murder case. The outcome now lies with the court. Legally, she's considered an adult. Under Georgia law, 17-year-olds charged with violent felonies can be tried in adult court. That places Sarah Grace in a legal category where adult-level consequences apply, including life imprisonment. Georgia law does not allow parole for malice murder unless the offender was under 18 when the crime occurred. Even in that case, parole isn't possible until after serving 30 years. So here's the sobering truth. If she's found guilty, Sarah Grace Patrick may spend the rest of her life in prison. The legal process is now in motion. So what happens next in the courtroom? First comes the booking and arraignment. Following her arrest, Sarah Grace was officially processed by authorities. While details about her bond remain undisclosed, early court appearances indicate that the judicial wheels are turning. The case is now moving toward pre-trial procedures, where key evidence, witness lists, and legal motions will begin to shape the narrative ahead of a trial. Probable cause hearings are the first legal step where the prosecution presents minimal but sufficient evidence to justify the arrest. Not to establish guilt, but to demonstrate that there's enough reason to proceed with prosecution. Next is the grand jury or formal indictment stage. If it hasn't already occurred, prosecutors will bring the case before a grand jury to obtain an official indictment. While often procedural, this step is fundamental for maintaining due process. Then come the pretrial motions, where the defense may attempt to exclude specific pieces of evidence, contest the validity of digital data, or dispute the admissibility of certain statements made by the accused. Trial phase. If this case proceeds to trial, as is expected, The courtroom proceedings will be open to the public. It will likely be the first time motive, digital evidence, and forensic details are officially disclosed. So far, Sarah Grace Patrick's legal team has not issued any public statements, but based on similar cases, a few potential defense strategies are possible. One route is a mental health-based defense, potentially claiming Sarah suffered from psychological instability or diminished mental capacity, suggesting she lacked full intent or understanding of her actions. Another angle might be that the shootings were accidental or not premeditated. They might also pursue an alternate suspect theory, proposing that someone else committed the crime. The defense wouldn't need to prove someone else is guilty, only to create reasonable doubt. As of now, no official legal filings have detailed the defense's approach. These are procedural possibilities, not speculative claims, but once the defense makes its strategy clear, it will shape how this case is publicly remembered and legally argued. In small towns, news spreads quickly, but in Carroll County, this story didn't just spread, it echoed deeply. The community that once mourned alongside Sarah now struggles with conflicting emotions. Neighbors have fallen silent, churches remain closed off, family members have withdrawn from public view. We lost a mother, we lost a father, and now we've lost a daughter as well. An anonymous church elder shared, "This wasn't a crime committed by an outsider. It was a breakdown from within." The prosecution will demand accountability, while the defense might plead for leniency. However, in cases like this, where the boundaries between child and criminal, victim and perpetrator become unclear, the justice system confronts a profound challenge. What does justice mean for a teenager who kills her own family? Is it a life sentence, rehabilitation, understanding the reasons behind her breakdown? And perhaps most unsettling, can there ever truly be closure? What if Sarah Grace Patrick is convicted? If a jury finds her guilty of both murders, she could receive 2 life sentences, with or without parole eligibility. Should parole be an option, it would only be considered after serving 30 years. Additional charges, such as aggravated assault or illegal firearm possession, might add even more years to her term. However, there's a complication. She was 17 at the time of the crimes, and under Georgia law, parole is possible, but not guaranteed for offenders her age. Practically speaking, this could still mean spending the rest of her life in prison. If Sarah Grace is found not guilty and acquitted, she will be released. But that legal freedom doesn't guarantee she'll be seen the same way again. Her family might never trust her. Her community may never forgive or forget. Regardless of the verdict, guilty or innocent, there is no true happy ending in this story. Tyus, Georgia, is a place where front doors used to be left unlocked and children rode their bikes without worry. Or at least, that was the case before. This tragedy didn't just affect one family, it shifted the entire county's sense of safety. Neighbors now question what goes unnoticed. Pastors deliver sermons with heavier hearts. Parents keep a closer eye on their kids. Because if something like this could happen here, what place can any of us really feel safe? At present, Sarah Grace Patrick is still in custody, waiting for her trial. No court date has been scheduled, and no evidence has been publicly released. Yet, the most pressing questions linger in the air like smoke from a fire that refuses to die down. Why did she commit the crime? Did she act alone? And can justice really mend what has been shattered? This tragedy in the small town of Carrollton, Georgia, shook not just one family, but the entire community. Sarah Grace Patrick, a teenager accused of murdering her parents, has become a symbol of destruction and mystery. The story, full of secrets and contradictions, makes us question how difficult it is to understand the motives and hidden feelings even of those closest to us. The investigation continues, and the trial is yet to come. The truth and answers remain behind the scenes. But regardless of the verdict, this story reminds us of the importance of paying attention to those around us and seeking help in time. Questions about justice, punishment, and the possibility of rehabilitation remain open and demand deep reflection. What do you think? Is Sarah guilty, and what punishment should she face? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments. We want to hear everyone. This story is more than just a criminal case. It reflects the complexities of the human soul and society. Your voice will help us understand how to prevent tragedies like this in the future.